Turn with me, please, if you will, to the Gospel of St. Luke, chapter 17, verse 2, a very familiar verse, or verses 1 and 2. And he said to his disciples, "It is inevitable that stumbling blocks should come, but woe to him through whom they come. It would be better for him if a millstone were hung around his neck and he were thrown into the sea, than that he should cause one of these little ones to stumble." Strong words. And it's not simply addressed to the world. It's addressed to people professing to be among us, as it were, in the church, as it were, professing to be believers. He's giving a warning, a very serious caveat. He says it's inevitable that these stumbling blocks should come. And this word, stumbling, used for stumbling block here, could be interpreted or translated temptation. But woe to him through whom they come. It would be better for him if a millstone were hung around his neck. Now, what it's comparing is a stumbling block, a block that you could trip over, with a huge, heavy millstone that, if fastened around someone's neck, would obviously drag them to the bottom of the sea or the lake or the river and drown them, cause them to die. Jesus said it's inevitable that these stumbling blocks, temptations, would come. But woe to those by whom they come. And then he makes it specific about a child hurting one of these little ones. We have applied this to people who victimize children, child abusers. We have applied it to child molesters. We have applied it widely and to secular readerships or secular sectors of the population. In the context, however, it is warning us, those who come in among us, as it were, who would come in among the church. Now, temptations are going to come. But here it goes beyond the temptation itself. It is something that would cause a child to stumble into sin. It is well known and well established that many child abusers were abused themselves. They were first the victim, then they become the predator. They're doing to others what was done to them. They are seeking a proxy vengeance. The sin perpetrated against them becomes perpetrated by them in a misguided quest for justice. But not only that, if this takes place in some kind of a sexual context, it will distort the sexual psychology of the victim. People wind up in all kinds of perversions when they are victimized as children. This happens in different ways. I have spoken to a number of homosexuals and lesbians who've gotten saved and become born-again believers in Jesus. And the Lord set them free from that unnatural orientation. But it is almost inevitable when you talk to them that they will tell you, if they are a male, they went into a gender identity crisis in early youth, in pre-adolescence, that they had an absent or missing or absent or negative father figure. And mommy became daddy. They began seeing paternal role models in their mother. The same is true with most lesbians I've met who've been set free from lesbianism and are no longer lesbianisms. They had an absent or missing mother figure, and their father became the mother figure. This accounts also for predispositions to bisexuality, because the father is being father and mother, or the mother is being mother and father. These people are damaged themselves. They are a victim. The divorce rate has caused this problem to expand into significant sectors of the population where there are a lot more people of these orientations now than there used to be. That is a direct result of children being born out of wedlock in larger numbers and a direct result of a divorce rate. We can do nothing but sympathize for children who lost a father or a mother in childhood, forcing the surviving parent to play both roles. This may be one of the reasons why Paul tells younger widows to remarry. Children need a role model of their own sex. Institutions, orphanages, while they may do some good things if they're properly run and operated, they will never take the place of a family with two parents, what some people call a nuclear family. Never. I have a surrogate son in Uganda. I've been his surrogate father since he was a baby. He is HIV positive from infancy. Ongoing medical problems, and working through a Christian organization that is very loving and very caring, run by some very godly people who love the Lord and love these children in Uganda. I have had this boy who's now a teenager, but it began when he was just basically not much more than a toddler. His name is Andrew, beautiful young guy, Black African in Uganda. I thank God for the good work that this ministry does. It's called Yes Ministries. Our own first children's mission at Moriel was founded by Dave Royal in association with myself in South Africa, and it was among AIDS orphan babies. And we tried to run this ministry, which we called Ebion, not as an institution, but as an extended family. And these orphans were brought up to be siblings. The family environment. Institutional environments are never ideal. And it is impossible to exactly mimic or replicate a family environment. Those situations are painful and difficult, and many self-giving Christian missionaries whom I've known and others have sought to love these children with the love of the Lord and see them become believers at a young age. They are victims of being orphaned. They're victims of AIDS. They're victims of poverty in the third world. They're victims of different things. We can't blame anybody but the devil for the plight of those children. But there have been institutions where the physical, mental, and sexual abuse of children were commonplace. I would refer people to watch the films like the Magdalene sisters, about the Magdalene laundries in Ireland, and the lesbian abuse by Roman Catholic nuns. 34,000 of these girls came forward and gave testimony to the Irish government in the Ryan Report. This is to say nothing of the baby skeletons found buried in back of the convent in Tuam, Ireland. Nearly 800 of them, but the Gardaí, the Irish police, estimate there may be 10,000 throughout Ireland of these babies. Nuns behaving as whores for priests. These babies just being buried, killed. Horrible things. But the testimony upon testimony of the physical, emotional, and sexual abuse of these girls. There were girls who were raped by priests. The priests got the girls pregnant. And the families and the church protected the priests. The girls were put in this institution called the Magdalene Laundry as slave labor that were basically penal institutions, even though the girls were underage when they were victimized. And then they were abused by the nuns, who beat them brutally and things of this nature. True Roman Catholicism is not biblical Christianity. There was a similar film called The Raggedy Boys. Again, these are proven instances that took place on a wide scale just in Ireland, by the Irish Christian Brothers, by the Sisters of Mercy, who took out full-page ads in the Irish Times admitting the abuse of the girls. Sometimes it included things like pouring boiling water on them. That's convent correction. This is sick, evil, and twisted. It is horrible. It has happened in other religions as well. It has happened among fundamentalist Mormons particularly. It is common in Mormonism. I did an outreach, or our American branch of our ministry, Moriel did an outreach. Annually, we used to do it at the Miracle of Mormonism pageant that was held every year in Manti, Utah. It no longer is held. And this is an epicenter of fundamentalist Mormonism. I met one chap who had 8 wives. Tons of children, of course. How are the children supported? By welfare, by the dole, by the taxpayer. How old were these girls when they got married? They were underage. This is just basically widespread pedophilia. And of course, they use the polygamy and polyandry of Brigham Young and Joseph Smith to justify it. Founders of Mormonism. Well, let's look further. There have been instances of homosexual abuse of yeshiva bookers, yeshiva boys, in ultra-Orthodox yeshivas. Instances. There are certainly widespread abuses of children taking place in Islam. The Ayatollah Khomeini of Iran said you should take a little girl before her first blood, before she began menstruating. Allowed to have up to 4 wives, and they take them as little girls, and it's not seen as rape. This also takes place among fundamentalist Sunni Muslims and others, not only Shias. These things are sick. They always happen in some kind of false religion or something cultic. On odd occasion, they happen in other religions. For instance, Kincora, Northern Ireland, that happened among Protestants, but that was an isolated instance. It is widespread among fundamentalist Mormons. It is widespread in Islam, and it is absolutely widespread in Roman Catholicism globally. But when you do this to a child sexually, it is not only sexual abuse. It is not only psychological abuse. It affects them spiritually and predisposes them to perversion. That was their sexual experience, being taken advantage of and violated. It messes with their psyche. It disturbs a normal psychosexual orientation. Forget about love. Forget about the biblical teaching about the husband is the head of the wife as Christ is the head of the church. Forget about the Song of Solomon or any biblical model of matrimony. We're talking about serious child abuse here that affects children physically, mentally, psychiatrically, and spiritually. Things are going to come. Society has now become so sick that we have evil people controlled by the devil. Not to be political, but Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, other such perverted people who believe it is acceptable for a biological male to share a locker or shower facility with your daughter. Or Walz, the vice presidential candidate under Harris, who as governor of Minnesota was putting tampon dispensers in boys' lavatories because there are women claiming to be males and they have to be legally recognized as such. Now, these people who do, these adults responsible for these kinds of policies, it would be better for a millstone to be tied around their neck and be cast into the sea. We think of Pope Benedict, who resigned, he's now dead, and his predecessor, who issued the Criminales Solicitaciones documentation protecting pedophile priests at the expense of not protecting their own Catholic children. Cardinal McKendrick in the United States, Cardinal Mahoney in the United States, one after another. Cardinal Law in the United States. These are cardinals who elect the Pope. Every bishop virtually in the United States, every prelate of every diocese. I think one exception where litigation is pending in Alaska, in Fairbanks, but all the other dioceses and archdioceses have been found culpable in court. In Ireland, every bishop has been nailed. And you find this in Australia, New Zealand, you find it in England, in France, 250,000 children abused since the 1950s by priests, all coming up. Belgium, what happened in Austria was shocking. And they knew it. The cardinals of Vienna knew it. Better for a millstone to be tied around your neck. The biggest catch of child porn, 8,000 hours of videos and images from St. Joseph's Roman Catholic Church in Newcastle, England, by a priest. 8,000 hours! Thousands and thousands of hours at the biggest Roman Catholic seminary in Europe, in Vienna. Roman Catholic seminarians basically being taught how to molest children. That's what it amounted to. That's what they were watching in the seminary. Goes on and on. Better a millstone tied around your neck. Now, of course, this goes beyond the sexual. Anybody who drags a new believer, a newly saved person, particularly a youth, but not only a youth, and misleads them into sin, better a millstone tied around your neck. Now look, I accept and expect such diabolical treachery from fundamentalist Mormonism. I expect such diabolical treachery from fundamentalist Islam. I even accept and expect such perversion and corruption from the Roman Catholic Church. They would castrate choir boys so they could sing soprano. They've always been sick and perverted and evil. But it's not only among them. Not only. We have seen sexually predatory material surfacing involving Brian Houston from Hillsong and his father, Frank, the bisexual child molester, and the cover-up by Hillsong. We have seen what's happened in the IHOP of Mike Bickle in Kansas City among people who claim to be saved Christians. This week, Great Britain was again rocked. For the first time in history, an Archbishop of Canterbury, the ecclesiastical head of the church, the British monarch is the titular head of the church. The Archbishop of Canterbury is the ecclesiastical senior cleric, prelate from Lambeth Palace. Justin Welby resigned. Normally, this is something we associate with Roman Catholicism. There have only been isolated instances of it among the Greek Orthodox, among other Protestants, and among evangelicals. It has happened, but nothing on the scale of the Roman Catholic Church, where it's normal, in effect. Commonplace and normal. However, there have been multiple instances in Canada and elsewhere involving the Church of England, the Anglican Communion. Desmond Tutu was pro-lesbian ordination as priestesses in the Anglican Communion and things of this nature in South Africa. What have we seen now in Britain? The High Church of England, the Anglo-Catholics are like the Roman Church Episcopalians, they're called in some countries. They are Anglo-Catholics. They're like Roman Catholicism without the Pope, acknowledging the British monarch and in some way the Archbishop of Canterbury instead of the pontiff in Rome. But sacramentalism, sacramental salvation, and also mandatory celibacy for their clergy among the high church clergy. The Lord made them male and female, said it is good. Paul had the grace to be single, and that is indeed a higher calling if you have the grace to be single for the sake of the ministry. But forbidding marriage is something that Paul calls a doctrine of demons. The Word of God says it's a doctrine of demons. Even the Catholic Church admits that Peter was married to Deborah, Peter the Apostle, whom they erroneously claimed to be the first pope. It's a doctrine of demons. So when you have a doctrine of demons that's been institutionalized in a false religious system with a false gospel, what do you expect? But that's Rome. Now we have it in the Church of England. But that did not occur in a vacuum. The Church of England, similar to catechetical Lutheranism, never fully broke with Roman Catholicism doctrinally. It broke institutionally, ecclesiastically, but not doctrinally. Bowing down to graven images, praying to the dead, all of these things happen among the high Anglicans. And I've seen photos of catechetical Lutherans like Chris Roseborough bowing down, praying to a statue of Jesus that was not crucified. These churches have never fully broken with Rome. Hence, they carry a lot of the baggage of Rome. The criminal conspiracy that we've seen repeated of protecting clergy at the expense of not protecting children, that has characterized Roman Catholicism repeatedly, should not be heard or named among believers or those who are believers but are in some association with those who do such things. How can you be part of this? Revelation 18:4, come out of her, my people. Yet you have an Archbishop of Canterbury who did just that. The homosexual sadism of John Smythe, in one outstanding instance, but there are others, undoubtedly, that went from England to Africa, brutally beating for sexual pleasure children, to the point where they required medical attention, and it became known. But much like the Vatican, Lambeth covered it up. Covered it up. However, there's more to it than that, or than this. Yes, Justin Welby knew about it and did nothing. He's been publicly disclosed for what he is and has been forced to resign. The first time an Archbishop of Canterbury has had to. The same Welby, however, was a very biased critic of Israel, defending itself from radical Islam, from violence. In Darfur this week, the slaughter continues of black African Christians at the hands of Arab Muslim militias. Nearly 10.5 million black African Christian refugees and black African Muslim refugees being persecuted brutally by Arab Muslim militias. It's hard to get a peep out of anyone about it. Not the BBC, not the CNN, not MSNBC. They ignore it. But of course, when Israel defends itself from radical Islam that persecutes Christians and murders Jews, then the Muslims are the victims. The world is supposed to be up in arms. But whose side did Welby come down on in his criticisms and his public denunciations? Hamas? Hezbollah? The Houthis? Iran? No. Hypercritical of Israel defending itself. Forget about the fact that arsenals, ordnance depots, the storage of weapons are found under mosques, schools, hospitals, and United Nations facilities where the United Nations Relief and Works Agency were in active collaboration with Hamas terror. No, he highlights Israel. I wish I could get him to speak out about Darfur. He didn't seem to have a problem that 400,000 people in Yemen, Arab Muslims, were killed by other Arab Muslims, or 700,000 in Syria, killed by other Arab Muslims, Alawites. That didn't bother him too much. At least he didn't say anything much. But when Israel defends itself, the Church of England is supposed to be up in arms. Then, of course, he is compromised on the same-sex agenda. The ordination of women, the ordination of lesbians, the ordination of homosexuals, and compromising with same-sex relationships. He's not standing for truth and righteousness. He's a theocrat. He's not a shepherd. He's a wolf in sheep's clothing. God had enough. I will bless them that bless thee and curse them that curse thee. Okay. The Lord allowed him to be caught out. The Lord allowed him to be exposed for the hypocrite he was and for the coward he is. Not protecting these children. But he's not the only coward or the only hypocrite. I recall in Tel Aviv, I had a face-to-face encounter with George Carey, a former Archbishop of Canterbury, who professed to be a born-again believer, at least at one time. He was surrounded by escorts from the Israeli Ministry of Religious Affairs. I spoke to them in Hebrew to get access to him. He assumed I was Israeli. And I confronted him about the first openly homosexual and lesbian service of homosexual and lesbian Anglican clergy in Southern Cathedral, and why he did nothing about it. He had written a book called The Meaning of Waters, calling for the reunification under the Pope, whom he called the Holy Father. Jesus said, "Call no man your father on earth." And his book was a direct contradiction to the 39 articles of the Church of England. He did not even uphold his own doctrinal constitution. He went on the media with the chief rabbi of Great Britain, Jonathan Sachs, and denounced giving the gospel to Jewish people, withdrawing his patronage from the church's ministry to the Jews. Can you imagine St. Paul or St. Peter doing something like that? Withholding the gospel from Jewish people? But George Carey, who said he was born again, did this. Did it matter to the so-called evangelicals of the Church of England at Holy Trinity Brompton or St. Andrew's Chorley Wood or any of these? No, it meant nothing. Business as usual. Religion and religiosity, pomp. Throw the Bible out the window. It's not about that. They did nothing. Well, they've done nothing again. But this time, God has had enough. The same one who compromised on the most fundamental of moral issues, who did so much damage to the cause of Christ among the Lord's own people, the Jews. Now we find out what he really is and what he really isn't. He's just a pedophile protecting hypocrite. That's all. That's all he is. It's all he ever was. And if he does not repent in earnest, it is all he ever shall be. But what happens in Anglicanism after this takes place? You will have members of parliament who are Muslim, who are New Age, who are Hindu, who are Roman Catholic, who are atheists, voting on whom to approve as his successor as Archbishop of Canterbury, to be appointed by a socialist prime minister and approved of by King Charles. Unbelievers, Muslims, atheists, homosexual members of parliament, voting on who's going to be the Archbishop of Canterbury. It doesn't matter who replaced George Carey. And it won't matter who replaces Justin Welby. It just won't matter. It is a bankrupt system, a theologically, spiritually, and morally bankrupt system. Is it the only one in the world? Certainly not. But it's no exception. Something we have said repeatedly to believers in the Anglican Communion. And it's not only about them, but they are not an exception. Revelation 18:4. I heard another voice from heaven saying, "Come out of her, my people, that you may not participate in her sins or share in her plagues." When you stay in it, you become part of it. I remember another pathetic figure, David Pitches, an Anglican bishop. On a video, he had people jumping up and down like pogo sticks, imitating birds flying and giggling, saying it was a revival. And he wrote a book telling people to follow the Kansas City prophets, Mike Bickle's crowd. The book was entitled "Some Said It Thundered." This was at St. Andrew's, Chorleywood. The Kansas City prophets, like Paul Cain, the homosexual, pedophile, and alcoholic. Bob Jones, the womanizer. You couldn't make this stuff up. Some said it thundered. This is the reality of people in the Church of England claiming to be saved Christians. That's their reality. They haven't changed anything. They've not been salt or light. It's gone from bad to worse, and worse to worse still. What they say does not matter. What I say does not matter. But what does Jesus Christ say? And he doesn't only say it about the Anglicans, but that's who we're talking about this week, and they are not an exception. What has Jesus said? Come out of her, my people, that you may not participate in her sins and may not receive of her plagues. If you are in that system that is compromising on same-sex marriage, on homosexual ordination, on protecting pedophiles and covering it up, on ecumenical union with Rome in violation of their own 39 articles and of their biased opposition to Israel and the Jews. And you claim to be a saved Christian? Come out of her, my people. That's not what I said. That's what Jesus is saying. Multiple times I've pointed out that those figures who reformed the Church of England, remember, the Church of England was not born out of conviction. It was born out of the political ambitions of Henry VIII, a womanizer who killed 74,000 of his own people, who opposed Protestantism, who opposed the Reformation initially, and only broke with it when the Pope would not give him a dispensation concerning Catherine of Aragon for a divorce and a remarriage. No other people did come along after that. Nicholas Ridley, Hugh Latimer, Bishop John Hooper, William Tyndale, who Henry VIII's theocratic lapdog Cardinal Wolsey had murdered. These people sought to reform the Church of England, and they were martyred for doing it in Oxford, in Suffolk, in Leicestershire, and elsewhere. But as I've said before, Cranmer and Tyndale and Hooper and Ridley and Latimer and the other Anglican martyrs that we read about in Fox's Book of Martyrs, they would be out the door of the Church of England today faster than they were out the door of the Church of Rome in the 16th century. I only speak the truth. What I say doesn't matter. My opinion is not worth anything more than anyone else's opinion. But the imprecatory statements and the imperative commands of Christ are not opinion. They're not the words of man. They're the words of the one who saved us and the one who is returning to judge the living and the dead. He says, "Come out of her, my people." How can you be part of something like that? But that's the reality. Welby is gone. His name, his reputation are permanently marred. He has reaped the consequences of his own actions. May the Lord show mercy to the rest of us. Nonetheless, you have people who will deliberately remain oblivious to the undeniable facts and try to be part of that church, if you want to call it a church. I would not. The true church is the church whose teaching and whose actions agree the Word of God. Anglicanism does not. Forget what I say. Forget anything that comes out of my mouth. I don't care. If you don't want to pay attention to me, I don't blame you. But in the fear of the Lord, let us all pay attention to Jesus. He doesn't say you're not his. He doesn't say I'm not his. But because we are his, he gives a plain and unambiguous command. This is not what anyone says but him. And it is what he is saying. What is Jesus saying? What has he said? Come out of her, my people. You heard him. Get out.